Basketball has its sixth man, the unsung hero who comes off the bench to help his team to victory. Football has its 12th man, an unseen but powerful energy that urges the home team forward. Now, Christianity has its 13th apostle, a faithful witness to the love, mercy, and truth of Jesus Christ. How about you? Will you be the 13th apostle?
Are the Catholic priests in the United States in harmony with their bishops and with the laity? Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the 13th Apostle, where we explore the good, the beautiful, and the true of the Catholic faith and the Catholic Church. This is Tom Caffrey with my co-host Dan Duddy. Happy New Year, Dan.
Happy New Year, Tom. How are you?
All right. The New Year start off okay for you? We're 10 days into it?
Yes. Having a really good year so far. It's going to be a great one.
Okay.
I'm doing a 90-day thing. I'm doing my own 90-day thing. I'm doing the
What's a thing?
Spiritual exercise of St. Ignatius.
Okay. It's a 90-day thing. So our audience wants to...
Well, here. So 90-day thing in America, there's that whole 90-day reset concept that everybody does. But spiritually, there's some really good stuff going on in our church, like Exodus 90. But I have taken the spiritual exercise of St. Ignatius and applied 90 to such. So that's what I'm in. I'm in deep. Not as deep as I want to, but it's wonderful.
All right. Well, I wish you all the best with that.
Thank you.
I'm in deep. Yeah, I'm in deep. I'm not going to tell the audience what I'm in deep with, but...
I know, you don't have to. We can all insinuate. But I didn't ask you if you were in deep.
Yeah.
I was wondering what you're doing. But, okay, you're in deep.
Yeah. So we are going to have... We have a guest today. I believe in my communication with our guest, I referred to guest star. Pete,
justifiably so.
Exactly.
Yep.
Peter Eschemann. Pete, is that Jr.? Pete Eschemann Jr.?
Yes, it is.
You don't seem like, it's funny, these appellations that we have and whatnot, these monikers, these junior, the suffix. So you don't seem like a junior to me, but that's relative to your dad. And did he call you junior?
Not at all. Nobody did.
Okay.
Did he call you by your first name, middle name, nickname?
I'm sure it was Peter.
Okay. All right.
Call me late for dinner, I can tell you that.
Well, we have you back on our program because of the juxtaposition of your background and at least a couple of topics. We could talk to you about any number of topics involving the church because of your background. So why don't you give a brief sketch of your background for our audience, and then they'll be able to have a much better context as to why we even have this guy, Pete Eschemann, on our program. So let's say we're talking about the priesthood, the Catholic priesthood in the U.S. So why does that relate to you?
Well, ancient history. I was a seminarian for 5 years through the School of Philosophy and into the first year of theology training. Actually, I exited the Capuchin Franciscan Seminary in 1969. Now, that was kind of a time when the documents of Vatican II were percolating. So there was quite a bit of experimentation. The 60s, of course, were a riotous time. And that was showing up as well in the seminaries. Now, I had 11 classmates who eventually were ordained. But of those 11, 6 subsequently left. Now, a vocation is not a profession. It's a calling, and it's difficult. Diocesan priests may not have as much of a social structure as religious priests have, in their parishes. But it's a difficult vocation to stay faithful to, considering the demands on your time and your attention. I'm sure some of those 6 who left were pulled out by the calls of a family. Some of them, I think, left under perfectly honorable circumstances, and some of them less so. But it was the 70s and the 80s were a chaotic time. I think John Paul II realized that things were going a little haywire, and I believe I've read somewhere that he was an extraordinarily strong exponent and explainer of the documents of Vatican II, which are rock-solid tradition documents trying to appeal to the modern world. They did not necessarily perhaps allow for all of the experimentation within the sacrifice of the Mass, but he also realized that there had to be some serious vetting in seminaries. I mean, that was a high school kid when I entered the seminary. I mean, those days were over. They now take more mature people who are vetted all along. And I'm sure the challenge is there not to view this as a profession or an escape, but a calling of service and sacrifice. Now, I think any vocation is tough. Married life, certainly. But, the call of priesthood takes an exceptional, generous response by an individual. And I think that needed to be nurtured, certainly identified and nurtured in the seminary as well. And so I think over the next several decades, seminary training for more mature men really has produced priests of a different quality, a different commitment than might have come out of the seminary in the 60s and 70s and 80s.
Well, I know Pope Benedict...
I'm not a sociologist, but I've been involved in parishes intensely all my life, and I offer this opinion.
Well, Pope Benedict, I know that he went to lengths, actually as Cardinal Ratzinger as well, about changing correcting the way the seminary training, the way it was carried, some of the curriculum, but also the spirit of it. And as I believe Dan and I talked about in another episode, we were talking about probably last week's episode about Pope Benedict and his passing. He was considered a progressive. And I wonder how many people who are big Benedict aficionados, supporters, know that about him, that he was progressive in his views in Vatican II. But part of that progressiveness, not so much exactly what we think of progressivism now, but there was a strong group leading up to, in the whole Vatican II experience and leading up to it, that wanted to keep the training, the emphasis in the church on what's called the scholasticism or the neo-scholasticism, the Thomas Aquinas, real strong in doctrine and philosophy. And Benedict, or at that time Ratzinger, and others wanted to be more progressive and say, no, we got to get back into more of the liturgy. Let's look at the early church fathers. Let's look at the first 300 years of the church. And so now, and he was, if we're looking at the articles we want to talk about today, both he and John Paul II, and of course he was like John Paul II's lieutenant for 24 years in the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, he wanted to rein that in, the waywardness, the misinterpretation. He became very conservative because he was looking to conserve. He saw the wilderness, as you did, what you talked about, where things got really wild after Vatican II and throughout the 60s, throughout the culture throughout the West. And So we have a lot. When you look at the statistics of the studies, and we in the articles, I believe you even sent those articles to us, Pete, looking at the priests who were ordained after 2010, that they are much more conservative than priests who were ordained before that, and certainly those who were ordained before the, say, 1990. And it's kind of like this Benedict versus Francis, because the older priests are much more in line with Francis. And Dan and I have talked about, right versus left, doctrine and liturgy versus social justice. These surveys, they make it clear that the younger priests do not favor Pope Francis. They favored Benedict and John Paul II. And there's very little syncing between the younger priest and the laity. So go ahead.
I was just going to say, we have to reflect that over the last 2 or 3 decades, we have gone into aggressive secularism in this country and relativism. So it doesn't matter what opinion you hold, it's equally valid with the next person's opinion. And there isn't any way religion should be in the forum where all of us are. It should be restricted and kept privately in your home or only in the church. Now, the priests in our country, the bishops and the priests, have to confront this kind of rampant secularism, this aggressive attacks on the church. Now, I think what our clergy now want is clarity, as opposed to ambiguity. Pope Francis is very much his mantra is mercy. And it's a wonderful thing for us to always keep in mind, because it tempers our tendency to judge people harshly. However, I think perhaps our younger priests are saying, well, that's fine. I can live with mercy. I'm not out there doing fire and brimstone like they might have been in the 40s and the 50s. But I need to bring the worshipers clarity. We talk about people not being in the church because they don't necessarily get in here. But can we be clear about the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist? In this country, we're trying to have a Eucharistic revival. We're looking for clarity. Mercy can overlay everything. So I just think there's a difference of emphasis. Not that there's disagreement.
It's really difficult to find clarity when there's disunity. Where there's disunity, there's chaos. And I think the articles and wonderful articles that you presented to us and your background really gives us some good insights here, as well as my knowledge of the priests, personal knowledge of the priests that are in my family. But there's an absolute disunity, and because of it, there's division. Tom and I talked about that last week in our last episode. And we don't want to play any role in fanning the fire of that disunity, but it's true. We have good, solid young priests in our seminaries, especially coming out, since the 80s, and decade by decade, they're getting more and more stronger and conservative. But yet they're complaining, legitimately complaining, justifiably so, that the bishops are leaving them hanging and they're really not supporting them. And the laity, the congregation, is getting more and more liberal. So here we have these good, solid priests that are hanging on to, these parameters, these strong walls that were really kind of became mud walls, mushy walls in Vatican II, only because of this. It's just a simple, it's fundamental. Here's an example. Your mother and father have great rules. You know what they are. You live by them. But then the babysitter comes in, and she or he, say she applies the same rules. Those rules are mushy. And before the end of the night, the kids own the house. And it's a little bit maybe an extreme of what Vatican II has done to the church. No. So I'm seeing those symptoms right now.
I can't quite use the word disunity. Mm-hmm. Because I still think, we're one holy Catholic Apostolic Church. But I do think we confront the fact that many of our laity, many of our parishioners don't feel the call, don't see the value, don't understand some of the basic theological concepts that would draw them back to the church. Now, you want to call that disunity? I was thinking that the bishops are often viewed as administrators. Now, how difficult it must be for a bishop to know all the priests in his diocese. How challenging it must be maybe to be a mentor or a supporter for all those. I think with cancel culture, priests are arguably, reasonably worried that an accusation could be a one-time fatal event, justified or not justified. If there were perhaps a closer pastoral bond between administrators and bishops, that might help.
Between administrators and bishops?
Between the bishops and their priests. I'm sure they try to do that, but it has to be very difficult. 200, 400 priests, scattered across a big geographic area.
But if that's where the problem lies, and that's where we need to go, then we need to get more eye and more personal with the players in our locker room. I'm the football coach. If you're going to build team, then you got to know who's on your team. You got to let them know you're there for them, and you got to lift them up. And you got to let them know that their charism is here for a particular calling, and it's going to fortify the church.
Now, I'll give you a parallel analogy. The principal in school will have 125 teachers, and I'm sure some of those teachers are deathly afraid that there could be an accusation or something misjudged in the classroom, and absolutely must wonder whether the school board, the administration, would have their back. It's one of those challenges in organizations.
Well, the survey makes it clear that a significant percentage of the priests do not feel that the bishops have their backs, that they're not going to support. And that's one of the things I don't understand. Since the Dallas Charter of 2002, and that was the charter put together by the bishops in response to the terrible abuse scandals in the clergy, and that charter, all the steps that were put in under John Paul II, and Pope Benedict, have proven to be dramatically successful. So I think the latest statistics we have are up to 2018, 2019, and but we have some other, like the full report, but we do have the statistics that are even more recent to say that out of the 50,000 plus priests and deacons in the U.S., it's a little over 50,000. 0.006% of the clergy had a substantiated charge made against him. So the data is overwhelmingly clear. And so with that, you'd say, well, why would so many bishops reflexively say, okay, guilty until proven innocent? And I know that that's one of the things that the surveys point out, that do you have my back, Bishop, or are you just looking? Are you gonna throw me under the bus, throw me to the wolves, and ruin my life, even though I'm innocent?
Well, these are feelings of insecurity, and
on whose part?
Well, I would say on the priests who feel that the bishop doesn't have their back. I think it probably mirrors the cancel culture in our general environment. So, why would they not? Now, if there are, so few, remember, sexual abuse is, I think, universal, every profession, It's part of human nature. It's the worst part of human nature. It'll never be eliminated. However, with the reforms and the training and the enlisting of more mature individuals and vetting, I think we have relatively few. That does not change the use of a past scandal as a weapon to strike the church still. Strike the shepherd to disperse the sheep. It still comes up. People still worry about it terribly, but there is so much more abuse in schools that they don't stop sending their children to schools. It's something we have to deal with. But I'm not really sure, in my experience, that our priests are worried about being thrown under the bus, because I don't really think they're worried about being accused or offended.
Well,
how would I know,
Yeah.
I'm just a guy in the pew.
Well, I think that when you look at the surveys, they do indicate that concern. Dan, you take it.
Yeah, there's boots on the ground. Once again, I'll go back to, we like to fool around and say I have my master's in dirt. We have our boots on the ground, and that's where the church lies. And I know many priests, and they say that the strength of the church, or where the church lies, truly is in the state of the bishops. And if this is what our priests are saying, and you know what, the articles are great, by the way, Pete. Thanks for sharing. The priests are all unnamed priests. By the sheer nature of the fact that they're unnamed priests is a manifestation of the cracks that are existing. And how are we going to, when they're the boots on the ground, they're the infantry, how are we going to make things better, Peter, when there's this amount of distrust?
Well, again, you're not going to have priests named. This is like to think, a scientific survey, which is always anonymous, so you get valid responses from those who do respond. But I think, again, boots on the ground, you have to look at your own parish and see if the priests in your parish are evangelizing, are reaching out to the people, are serving, the sick and the poor.
I like that answer. Yeah.
I think you're going to find that these priests are doing the Lord's work. And we shouldn't...
or they're not, but that's where you need to go. Go ahead.
We shouldn't mistrust them because there's a survey that has a sample.
Well, I think that before we wrap it up, the challenges, we talk about the traditional and progressive. You've got, according to the surveys, you've got the majority of the laity who favor female priests. That's according to the survey. You have an even larger majority that think the church should bless same-sex relationships. Almost 40% want the church to support euthanasia. So, but Pete, we are in the world, as Jesus says, but not of the world. And the truth, we put the flag down of truth, and that's where the flag stays, and we orient ourselves to the truth. The flag doesn't orient itself to what's around it. And we have our flag is the cross, it's the church.
That's right.
So we're gonna wrap this up.
It's not going to pivot in the wind.
No, it'll blow in the wind.
Steady.
Yep, it'll blow in the wind, but the pole will still be there. So, Pete Eschemann, another lively discussion. Always enjoy having the discussions with you. This was a joy to have you on, and we'll probably have you on again. You've requited yourself very well. You are a faithful servant of the church. Is that enough praise for you, Pete?
I want you to know the last check bounced, Tom.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was our guest star, Pete Eschemann. We will not have him back on the air, but we've just fired him. Thanks again, Pete. You're a good man. God bless you, brother.
Welcome, gentlemen.
Hey, Pete, thanks, man. That was awesome. Thank you. Stay tuned, folks, for the Angelus and your prayer intentions with Peter and Jimmy.
WQPHradio.org. Serving Shirley, Fitchburg, and the world. And we're so thankful for this platform, have these great discussions. We deepen our faith, live the gospel, help build the kingdom of God on earth. God bless you all. God bless you, Danny.
God bless you, Tommy. God bless you all.
Thank you for listening to the 13th Apostle with Dan Duddy and Tom Caffrey. For more information on Dan, visit his website at www.danduddy.com or email dcduddy@gmail.com. Tom's website is faithpilgrims.com or email trcaffrey@faithpilgrims.com. How about you? Will you be the 13th Apostle?